Hello world, it's Lee Kelson coming to you live from our studio for FireTech Connect. And my guest today is a long-time associate now. We've bumped into each other all over the world in actual fact. She's the chairman of SVI Global, OneGlobalVentures, Launch Victoria, the chairman of Foundation for Advancement of Science and Technology, and is on the board of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, Epworth Healthcare, the National Basketball League, Defence Science Institute, and is a director of several private investment companies. She's a global thought leader on the development of the creative economy and its impact on the future of industry structures, social cohesion, and economic innovation. And I don't know how she has time to do anything else. Welcome, Laura Anderson.
Oh, Lee, it's such an honor to be here with you and so great to see you again. Love your background, love the beautiful sunny skies of Queensland.
Yes, it's actually been a bit cold up here. We've had a bit of a cold chill, but I must say I feel very fortunate that I am in lockdown in a beautiful place like this. And it does make me think of the people that aren't as fortunate, that are, perhaps either have nowhere to live or, I've heard some people have got 8 family members in one small house. So I don't know how they do that. Getting a bit of cabin fever. I don't know about you, but I want to get out.
Without a doubt, I've been camping down on our land, our farm. It's very funny. So I always say, let's opt into whatever may come our way. But I've learned some definite new skills, from the chopping of wood to the fixing of the dunny and all sorts of good things.
I'm looking at you with that backdrop there, and I'm thinking I can't see you fixing the dunny and chopping wood. But
very legitimate, very legitimate. Yeah.
So I think the last time we saw each other was in Bangkok.
It was.
And what have you been up to since then, aside from the virus, of course?
Oh, Lee, it's been an amazing journey, really. So again, it's always an honor to see you. So I think, we had the engagements in Indonesia, which I think tie into some of the things we'll discuss today. Thailand, of course. Since then, I've been to Israel. I'm doing a lot of work on Industry 4.0. I've been involved very heavily and deeply in the innovation space, as you know. And so we've spent a lot of time on the West Coast of the US as well as the Northeast. I've done a lot of key things in space and space tech, which is my passion. And so I've been working with JAXA and the S-Booster program, which engages the 42 space agencies around the world, but it's all about space entrepreneurship and space technology. Again, my thinking is perhaps that has a linkage to some of your aspirations and what you're doing now.
Definitely. So we were talking just offline about FireTech Connect and what that's all about. So, just for your information, it's an initiative originally out of the Noosa Shire Council, where Peregian Beach late last year had a catastrophic fire and nearly burnt down Peregian Beach, which is, just 10 minutes south of Noosa Heads. And the director of the digital hub up there, Chris Bowden, approached me and said, this is an idea. What do you think? And originally it was sort of the idea of an accelerator program. And I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit skeptical about accelerators and the outcome and the output from those accelerators, and felt that it probably needed a little more than that. And the more that I investigated, the more I found there was probably 2 parts to the problem. Number one is the commercial capability of the emerging promising companies. And number 2 is the sort of the bureaucratic inertia within government and the procurement side that, and you can understand it from the perspective of it's a life and death style technology. It's a little bit like health tech, but there's no body that puts it through, like the Therapeutic Goods Administration, that puts them through a rigor and tests them and makes sure that the tech works, to give that surety on the procurement side. So they're the 2 sort of ends that we're working at. And that's where I thought, who can I get to help me do this? And that's where you came in. And interestingly, on the space side, we've got a really interesting company that's joined FireTech Connect called Fireball International. And they're doing some amazing things with early detection of fires using satellites from space. And really, from a fire perspective, the best thing you can do with a fire is detect it early and put it out when it's still a small fire.
Agreed completely. And the experience that we've had here in Australia, with the early year fires and end of year of 19 and into 2000 and the year 2020, and obviously what happened in Queensland in September of 2019, it just makes us so aware of, one, the need to do what you're doing, but also about Australia is just part of a global ecosystem, and we all share the air we breathe, and it's important that we address these issues as a global community.
It is, and I think it's interesting you say that, because I was had another cause that's very close to my heart is the Women's Startup Lab in Silicon Valley, and they've been doing a global accelerator with women from all over the world that they bring together during the summer, and they usually have a cohort of about 12. Of course, they've gone virtual with that now, and we were having that discussion yesterday about, as much as this virus and the challenges and the devastation that it's causing, both from a health perspective and an economic perspective, but it's almost like it seems to be connecting people across borders even more. Have you found that?
Very much so. There was a webinar that we had yesterday with Monash University, hosted for what they call the MIGHTY program. So that's industry engaging with education and government, to, again, give experiential learning to students, but to solve some of the greatest problems in industry. And we were talking about the impact COVID's had on, again, industry structures, competitive advantage periods, but also the impact it's having on society as a whole. And one of the things that I think came out of it, there's this wonderful book by F. Scott Fitzgerald called Great Expectations. And it starts with, these are the best of times and these are the worst of times. And I think, there's so many learnings, and I believe that's the era that we're in. And I think it's all a mindset and how we can work to kind of not just transform. And this is so important. I've been using the word transcend. So it's kind of that quantum leap. And given last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of man walking on the moon. But if we're really thinking, not just keeping things status quo, of really thinking differently. And I think what has been beautiful out of this period is we've all been able to engage technology. For example, what we're doing now. I have to rethink our business models and rethink the value proposition that our business models are delivering to whom. And so I think, again, that creates within me this curiosity and the potential of the unknown, that, again, we're just racing towards the future. But I think we also have a value system, and that's what I love so much about, being Australian, is that it is about community. And again, the importance of what you're doing, but as part of, again, the Australian community, but also the greater global community.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the conversations that I've had with people, and you say it's a mindset. My observation is, and I've been through some challenging times in my previous businesses where, the immediate thing is to sort of go into that fetal position. And what have I lost? I've lost everything. I've lost all my money. I've lost. But then, I suppose my own experience was I managed to get myself into a mindset will say, hang on, what have I got? I've got some loyal customers. I've got some shareholders. I've got some cash. I've got a database of 50,000 people, and you start thinking about what I've got and how do I leverage that and how do I now pivot that? And it's easier for some than others, but I think it starts from a mindset.
Without a doubt. And, that resilience. The other thing that I think is important is, as we start to rethink and reimagine the future, is it's not just about innovation. I think we use that word and sometimes it can be overused. I think it's about innovation. To me is optimizing and rethinking the as is. I really believe it's about invention, and it's about the unknown and really thinking laterally. And that's what I love about harnessing diversity. And, currently, but also in the past, when we talk about diversity, it starts with gender diversity, doesn't it? And then it moves to maybe cultural diversity and age diversity. But I think we're talking now about work style diversity, and we're talking about thought process diversity and value system diversity. And so as we're moving to the future, I've really been examining people's approach to their business models, but how they develop their strategies. And in the days of old, the MBA studies of, you develop your strategy by, where have you been, where are you going by when, and how are you going to get there? That rule of three. I think now it's flipped 90 degrees. And right now, and what we're all confronted with is a values-based starting point. So to me, you go values, vision, and strategic framework. So values is aligned or not aligned. That's in or out. And as you said, when you start counting your assets that you have, or I'd say your blessings as well. And, it's just, you just start saying, great, what are the things that you do have, and making sure it's aligned. And those are the people that you'll play with. Those are your stakeholder groups, and they're the ones who will be your partners, your collaborators, your customers, and your suppliers. Then you go to a vision, the vision stage. And I think that's what we're all doing now, is even before, we went live, as we were talking offline, it's all about, what are the ways that we can all collaborate together? And it's about a shared purpose. And again, that's where fire tech, I think there's so much potential in that, and not just locally, but regionally and globally. And then below that, I think the next challenge we have is no longer do we have hierarchical management reporting systems where, you have a boss and an employee. I think it's now back to establishing the leaders who have to be brave, establish the strategic frameworks. And within those frameworks, it's making key decisions, but again, in an envelope that then enables the people within that ecosystem to go forth and create. And, one other thing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem that I find is a great challenge is I don't necessarily like the framing of fail fast. You and I talked about that last time, but I think it's about evolve, adapt, so sense and respond at the speed of thought. And I prefer that versus failing fast. And what is failure? Part of the things that we find is when things don't deliver the outcomes in the timeframes that we hoped or expected or planned, is that failure? And I say no, as long as you learn.
Yeah. So I think W. Brian Arthur, the economist, wrote on the increasing returns of economics. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he talks about there is the idea of the old industrial type businesses, found efficiencies through operational structures and hierarchies and sort of bedding down foundations. And this new increasing returns economics is being nimble, agile, being adaptive, sort of, I don't know whether you've ever read the book, Who Moved My Cheese, but I love that book. It's the idea of just constantly being on your toes, looking for where the next, not chasing the next shiny thing, but being prepared to adapt and move and be agile and nimble. And that's sort of the world that we're in. And when I'm having these discussions with people, I find that, there's this, when we get back to normal, and I'm sort of like, I don't know whether the normal was that great. Haven't we got an opportunity here to reinvent ourselves? And wouldn't the biggest sort of, one of the big things that come out of this is that we don't take this opportunity to change and rethink things and build something different.
I agree. And that's why I try and keep reframing innovation into invention. Why I keep trying to reframe transformation into transcendence, so and that quantum leap, it's a whole different sphere of thinking and of operating. And, but without a doubt, and that's why I keep saying it's the best of times and worst of times, it comes back to, and what is failure? It comes back to how do we embrace the now? And what do we do? Because all we have is the now. We can't remake the past. And I agree with you. The past isn't, the utopia. It's that grass is greener, isn't it? And, I think right now, oh my goodness, how fortunate are we? Look at the sky behind you, and we have our health, we hope and we're thankful for that. And we have all sorts of assets. My belief in to be forever young is to always have your potential outweigh your experience. And what we do is we have this amazing life journey, and look at the amazing things you've achieved, but to have your potential outweigh your experience, just think of what that future holds for all of us. And
But that's an interesting point as well, because the entrepreneurial life is one of uncertainty. And so, like we've lived a life of uncertainty. So we're actually used to it. We're not outside our comfort zone. It's the uncertainty. For me is always, okay, the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. What's the opportunity in all of this? That's what gets sort of exciting from an entrepreneurial mindset, is that there's opportunity that comes out of it. But there are people that aren't used to that uncertainty, that have certainty in their life, or the belief that they have certainty in their life. And all of a sudden they're thrown into this world of uncertainty, and they're really struggling to adapt to that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, on one hand, I thrive on, it's being that sand in the oyster, so what is it, just constantly saying, so what if, and that George Bernard Shaw quote of, you look at things and ask why, I look at things and ask why not. And I think I'm by nature a why not person, but that doesn't mean I'm not afraid. I have all sorts of times where I'm a human being, and as we all are, and we all have different tolerances for risk, and risk. We have a different risk appetite. And so I think as we emerge into this new era, and I really think it's the new normal, but there isn't really a new normal. It's just this era of constant transformation. And like, you even look at, the value of the ASX was lost in 4 weeks, we've lost a third of the valuation of the ASX listed stocks. I mean, it's unprecedented times. And so I think the commercial realities of, what are the economic benefits of the startup ecosystem as it scales up and it evolves, hopefully, into unicorns for some people, and what are the new industry sectors that are emerging out of this crisis and this new way of thinking. And I've been heavily involved in, that whole SDGs with the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, and working on the World Economic Forum's Fourth Industrial Revolution and the different sectors they've defined. But I like to call it the Fourth Industrial E-Revolution, because it really is about industry integrated entrepreneurship, but also government integrated entrepreneurship. And you mentioned sometimes the lethargy of governments. And I think the other thing COVID's done is it's forced governments to try and think laterally and think differently, because the tax base is shrinking, the economy is shrinking. They have a duty of care and responsibility to the citizens, whether it's in their city, their state, their country, their region. And so, again, it's a huge opportunity for, again, an alignment of values, making sure that, we're all operating from the same intent. And then from that, now that shared vision, and I think that's one of the purposes even of today's program, is to try and understand what opportunities may exist out there and how we might work together to solve, in the case of this opportunity, $100 billion per year opportunity that exists that devastates lives, communities, economies, and but also how, and one of the questions I had coming into today's interview was really looking at how it can be scaled and looked at in a broader fashion, not just around fire tech, but looking at the capabilities and some of the things that you're addressing, and that then just provides more opportunities for the local entrepreneurs and the local startups and the Australian, again, entrepreneurs and economy. But then you look at, look at the Australian US cohort that helped us when we had our major bushfires. People came together, didn't they? And COVID, everyone's shutting down now. But, I think it's there'll be new things that emerge. And but I'm such a believer in the Fourth Industrial E-Revolution, but tech-enabled and at the speed of thought.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that, we are talking with the state of California, and there is already a relationship there where we, for years we've sort of shared firefighters and resources around fire tech. And I think that there is a broader application for what we're trying to do broadly in emergency services, but then sort of beyond that. And obviously we've had to change our thinking in terms of how we deliver the value that we're looking to deliver to the stakeholders, and that's the federal government, state government, and the local Noosa Shire government. But I had an interview with Guy Kawasaki the other day, and he was great. But he said, he's got this thing, therefore what?
Yeah.
And I just love that. So, this is happening, therefore what? What does that mean? How do we seek out what that means to try and make sense of that and understand that? And sometimes it's not blatantly obvious. We have to actually seek it out and say, okay, so that's interesting. And the case that I pointed to is that if we look back in 30 or 40 or 50 years and we see the economic spike of e-learning, e-commerce, video conferencing, we're going to look at that spike from an economic lens and say, wow, what happened there? So whilst we've seen the adoption, my time back in the internet of the late 90s, where we were talking about convergence and that e-commerce was going to take over the world, and really 20 years later, we haven't seen, we've seen growth, but we haven't seen the exponential growth that perhaps we thought we might. Now we're in this sort of growth spurt and things are changing so drastically. It made me start thinking about all the infrastructure in terms of roads and freeways and public transport to get people into cities. And now all of a sudden people aren't going into cities, but productivity hasn't necessarily been impacted in the extent that we would have thought. So do we end up with stranded assets? Are we just going to go back to this normal where everybody just gets back on the freeways and goes into the city? Or do you think that the behavior is going to really change after this?
I definitely think behaviors will change, but what I'm aspirational about is the infrastructure development plans put in place by governments all over the world have been developed around the norm, right? So look at roads, right? But we're looking at autonomous vehicles, and what does that mean? And that has to be enabled by big data. And currently we don't have 5G in place. We're talking about different ways to implement it. Look at how much we've spent on the NBN. Like, there's all sorts of challenges that are facing our country, but globally they're real issues on big data optimization and how does that enable infrastructure. Infrastructure of physical assets versus digital assets are two different things, but they're both infrastructure in my mind. So, just a real good example, I think, is looking at the future of mobility. And, for that, again, as I mentioned, autonomous vehicles, there's how people are putting in place, governments have to put in place funding packages and plans that are 10 and 20 and 30 years out. But they're still trying to support the automotive industry in its traditional way versus thinking alternative modes of mobility and what the volumes will be on those roads. And they've been looking at almost iterative growth instead of looking at how people may start behaving. And I think that's one of the interesting things, out of this era, out of COVID, is that, again, because we are now, we've been forced to challenge our ways of working and working styles and work from home, or it'll support different family structures and ways people have to work to support their family. So the impact on the roads, I think, will be very different, plus the types of vehicles on the roads. And look at you wouldn't want to be an oil company at this point in time, would you? And I was just at Tesla when I was in Robin the chair. She's amazing. She's an Australian, love her. And she was at Telstra before going to chair Tesla. So we were together for a week in California. And one of the things we did was we spent quite a bit of time talking about Tesla's growth and strategy and aspirations. And again, you look at the diversification of what they are doing as an organization. And Elon Musk is one of my great heroes. I think he's amazing, his mind and his courage. But, you start coming back to, again, your question on infrastructure and what will the future look like? And I think it's just causing governments, but led by the private sector and by conversations like this that'll continue to ask some really key compelling questions that say, do we really need to invest that much money into the development of physical hard infrastructure, or are there other ways to achieve the same outcome in a much more agile, versatile way that allows us, again, to continue to grow and rethink how we do things?
Well, you mentioned the oil companies and, oil, gas, and to a large extent coal companies. $48 billion a year, I think, is attributed to our economy in coal. And, we've seen this crazy sort of debate that's politicized to a left and a right, and, denial of climate change. And, I think the argument seems to be focused too much around, whether it is real or whether it isn't, or whether it's man-made or not. To my mind, it's, well, the unknown is how much have we contributed and how much is it just the natural evolution of a 4.5 billion year old rock that we spin on, and how much of it is, created by our doing. But everybody I've spoken to about the catastrophic fires says that they were hotter, faster. There was things that they saw there with firestorms and generating their own weather patterns and weather systems that the people that I've spoken to that have been firefighters for 50 years have never seen. So I think that's undeniable. From a political perspective, how do we tackle that? How can we get to the nub of solving the problem if at a political level in Parliament, we still can't come to terms with the fact that we're arguing about whether it is real or not?
Well, is the problem that you're asking, can we solve how we allocate our budget to develop critical infrastructure to support the future economic benefit and societal benefits that we aspire to? Or is it around, how can we help government to understand emergency services? There's kind of two different ways I would frame that and frame my response.
Yeah, I'd say probably maybe both. It's like, there is the how do we allocate our budgets? But it seems to me that until such time as we can sort of all get on the same page and get the, the federal government's certainly been supportive of the FireTech Connect program. There's no doubt about that. But it seems to me that until we sort of come to terms with the fact that we've got a really serious existential crisis on our hands, that and we're still having this sort of kicking the sand around in the sandpit debate, that we're not actually addressing the problem, or how do we go about addressing the problem?
Yeah, and maybe if you're happy, I'll share my thoughts on both of those levers. One is overall critical infrastructure side, and then the second is on emergency services, because emergency services then disrupt once you put a plan in place for critical infrastructure. They're the unknowns that are catastrophic, as you said, and it seems to be growing in intensity. And again, the whole climate change agenda and other things are at play there. But maybe just on critical infrastructure, one of the things I think that governments are challenged with, is this new world order of political diplomacy and the shifting of power bases, and again, the unknowns around that. So most of the critical infrastructure decisions I find within governments globally start with the national security strategy. And from then they define then indigenous capability that's required to support the national security strategy. And then from that, they have to do some projections around those critical infrastructures and then come up with a plan on, what risks are there and what overlaps. And then they put in place kind of some controls, which may be an industry engagement program and investment programs in infrastructure, roads, rail, that type of thing. So that's one way that governments all over the world, I've worked quite heavily in that area. with my defense portfolio. But then you start working on economic development now. So just take it to a different level. So one is on defense, the other is on economic development, which is one of the things we're confronting now. And the same thing would apply. So you define what is the lifestyle that we expect for the citizens of Australia, right? So what is the economic outcome that we feel is the Australian way? And so we would define that, and that's what hopefully during the election process, we listen to all of the parties, and with our mandatory voting, I think it's great because everyone has a say. And then we elect, we vote for the party who articulates the value system that we believe in and the lifestyle choices that we hope to make. From that, critical infrastructure decisions are made based on those economic output decisions. And so right now we have, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg 2 days ago, kind of gave us an update as Australians, knowing that the budget won't be handed down till October, but they're currently socializing it, and they have to bed it down by August for then presentation and approval in October. So we do have a chance to have a say-so, and I think government is listening, because if you look at the regulatory, the loosening of some of the regulatory constraints that have been in place, as well as some of the investment initiatives that they've made over the last 4 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, and even 3 months, but in very short orders. I think, I have to applaud what they've done and how they've done it. But now it's how do we recover, and revitalize. So far, I'd say I've been really, really, really impressed with Australia's response to this global challenge. But now let's talk a little bit about emergency services and how do we get government's attention. So I applaud the Australian government for what they've done, and the state governments and the communities and the citizens, really. And, like you were saying, some people, we've all had to lock down, and in our own ways, we've managed through that. And it's produced so far so good, some great outcomes, and I encourage everyone to continue to stay the course to the best of our abilities. Now, the second thing, emergency services. So how do we get governments to really invest and support in a time frame that delivers the outcomes? Because sometimes I think that deliberation, even the process to apply for grants or funding or partnerships and establish that is just so lethargic. And I agree with you, and it can take so long. But what's interesting is I just keep saying, and as you know, what Boston and I have been working on is just move fast. Now's the time to move fast. And because there's an appetite, and the challenge you have and government has is sometimes it's that squeaky wheel gets the oil, and so
I can be squeaky.
I know, exactly. And so if you have a value proposition that you really believe in, just go for it, and I think it is a bit of survival of the fittest, and I think, or the squeakiest. And so I think articulating your value proposition is so key. And that's one of the things that I love with fire tech. It's one of the elements that you have, and your I guess, advisory board of mentors. You have a couple people there who are heavily involved and have an incredible background in sales and marketing and in pitching, and as well as venture capital. So I think it's helping the entrepreneurs in your sector be able to clearly and succinctly articulate their value proposition in a way that their audience, who they need to ask to do something, and in this case, government, understands and is compelled to take action now. So I think there are great challenges, this time compression and capturing the attention of the decision makers to take the action that we believe is required. And as I said, there'll be some things that, people with the squeaky wheel who may not, nothing's perfect, but they may be given monies that perhaps an entrepreneur may think that they deserve. But all the more reason we need to all continue to take personal responsibility for ourselves and our organizations to upskill and to opt in. And so I think government is open and willing to listen, but we need to understand that whatever it is we propose has to have economic benefit as well as societal benefit. And another thing that I loved, Lee, and your prospectus is that those are two of the key elements, you know, your strategic objectives, that economic return.
That's it.
So it's fantastic. And that's why I love what you do and why I'm here today. So, yeah.
So, I mean, on that, I mean, I could sit here and talk to you for hours, Laura, but, you know, I agree with you with the government's response in Australia and the community in Australia. And, you know, I'm a keen observer of what happens globally, and like you know, read extensively every day around to sort of, you know, just fill in the blanks as what's happening globally so that I don't have a myopic view of the world. And particularly, you know, North America and the US and what's been happening there. And I mean, it just blows my mind. And as a benchmark, when you look at the way that Australia has responded so decisively and the community's been so supportive, and as much as we've all got cabin fever and, you know, we understand that it's not so much about our health, it's about looking after other people's health. And that's where I think, you know, Australian community and culture is sort of comes into its own, like nowhere else. And you know, I've spent a lot of my time over my life living and working and traveling to the US. So I've got a lot of friends there, and, you know, there's a lot of despair there at the moment, particularly with the lack of leadership.
Do you really want me to comment on that? No,
I do.
I am so happy to comment on that because, as I said, I'm a big believer in values. And I'm also a big believer in the end does not justify the means. And so I don't support bullying behavior. I just, that's probably all I need to say. But there's an election coming up at the end of this year. And I hope that the people have woken up now, because there is not mandatory voting in the US. And so hopefully people will wake up and vote. And vote. And so, yeah, so, and I think, you know, that's probably all I need to say, but no, I agree with you completely. And in the absence of leadership, all sorts of things can happen. But what I love is there is that values-based approach to prior presidents having a say. I look at the role the media is playing in all of this. And again, they can twist and tangle and manipulate, but they can also support and enable. So hopefully, again, everyone needs to have a voice, but, and you have to make sure if you believe in what you're doing, that your voice is strong and loud and consistent.
I think that is a great message to wind up on. But thanks very much again, Laura. It's been great to catch up with you, and hopefully next time it'll be face to face, and we'll certainly talk offline about how we can work together to try and help drive forward the fire tech program.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Lee. Thanks for everything.
See ya.
Stay well. Bye.
Bye.